Hey everyone, welcome to the second half of class. Welcome to the beginning of what I hope is going to be a real set of exciting lessons and discussions as we begin by examining theories of political symbolism. Now, right about now, you are probably working on the final touches of your first reading evaluations. So I'm not going to begrudge you if you don't finish this chapter that is assigned by Nicolai Petro in his book, Crafting Democracy, How Novgorod Coped with Rapid Social Change. But I definitely want you to have it read when your paper is done. And I want you to go back to this chapter repeatedly throughout the next couple of weeks, because it's really going to serve as, I think, the theoretical and the intellectual foundation for where we're going to go. And we're going to be doing some real interesting experimentation with political science, anthropology, history. We're going to be doing a lot of things that make this standalone class, politics and culture, that I have traditionally taught, one of the more liked aspects, one of the more interesting aspects. The students really like this subject. So, I've kind of sold you on a series of ideas that I haven't even covered yet, but this lecture really should also, along with Petro's chapter, be referred to throughout the semester. So, you have two other reading evaluations that you have to complete, and kind of think of this new section as including both of those papers, right? So, view this lecture as kind of like the textbook accompaniment to that chapter in Petro's book here. So without further ado, right, let's just jump right in. Second half, sort of new material, but I think that at this point, if you have begun to understand the dynamics and the versatility of culture, a lot of this stuff should be pretty self-apparent. So, what we have been talking about thus far is how culture and cultural preferences sort of form collective beliefs, shape collective action, and orient the ways in which groups think and position themselves vis-a-vis other groups. So this second half of class kind of brings us back to some of those earlier discussions that we had with David Layton, and even that Segru article on Martin Luther King. It's kind of a prelude to what we're beginning now. So the second half of class is going to be a bit more, anthropological than hardcore political. And so we'll be examining culture, cultural preferences, collective action, collective memory, historical memory, and competing historical narratives. Now, you might think to yourself, this sounds a bit daunting, and I'm not going to lie, you are going to have to know, what many of these terms mean. You're certainly going to need to know the difference between collective memory and historical memory. I'm not going to get into that this lecture. We'll do that the following week. Consider this week that accompanies Petro's chapter to just be the nice, welcoming, hopefully interesting introduction, right, to that discipline. And we'll, go through this in the same methodical way that we did with theories of social capital. But within that, broad conceptual introduction, we will be really looking at a number of broad-based issues, like why do people think what they think, right? You didn't think we were going to get this metaphysical, right? Why do people think what they think? Why do groups believe what they believe? We are about 2 weeks away, finally, from Election Day. And, if you have been just even passively following what's been going on in this country over the past couple of months, you probably have wondered to yourself, why do Trump voters think the way that they do? Why do people who are actually enthusiastic about Joe Biden think the way that they do? Why are more, left progressives so disillusioned and disappointed? Right? Who's right? Who has the correct way of understanding what it is to be American? And, with this, it kind of revisits one of the first things that we talked about in class, and that is sort of the idea that culture is, sort of tenuously shared and socially constructed. So is culture and cultural preferences something that you still believe to be entrenched, rigid, static? Oftentimes when we think of culture, we think of this bedrock of beliefs and identities that, we do not deter from, we do not shift away from. And more often than not, culture doesn't, disanchor itself from certain non-negotiable truths. But I think it's fair enough to say that one can have a different number of variations on, certain key cultural, beliefs and preferences. And this comes in handy, I think, very critically when we examine how groups cope with rapid social, political, and economic change. When we get to the second half of this second half of class, we're going to sort of re-examine some aspects of American political culture. And I wanted to keep it, for the most part, local, just largely because many of you are not international studies students. You're not trained, to be history majors or political science majors. I mean, we will be looking at a few cases around the world, but I took out some of the more historically specific elements that would normally be for this class, and we're focusing largely on American political culture. But I think you'll agree with me that 2020 has been a really weird year, and it's not because the planets have misaligned. I think it's just because it's a year of so many problems and issues just converging finally into one critical shatter point. And in times of uncertainty, in times of I guess a belief that the way things that we've always done things is no longer something that we can rely on. But, the politics as usual, the assumptions that we normally take, they no longer comfort us. And I think that that's one of the reasons why so many people are gravitating towards alternative modes of political thinking, historical interpretation. Some of them may be more accurate than others. Others might be deliberately misleading. But, I think you'll, realize, in a very simple way that, the world is kind of going a little nuts. And I think that's because the taken for grantedness that we have just been told to believe will always get us through is no longer there. Right? It is really no longer there. And I think that nothing represents that better than the political phenomenon of Donald Trump. Whether you like him or hate him, he is definitely representative of this type of social, political, and economic change. So, if I was to kind of put this into a little bit more of a visual here to kind of make sense of, what I'm talking about, I like to view culture as more of a filter than an obstacle. Right? This is kind of one of the big things within studies of, culture, political culture is culture an obstacle, a barrier, or a filter? Right? If you go on the assumption that culture is an obstacle or a barrier, you assume that culture, your beliefs, your practices, your philosophical tenets, whatever it is that make you up, serve as some kind of defense mechanism against any kind of new outside influence. Right? Your culture just kind of rebuffs that. Almost like a deflector shield or something like that. Right? And your culture keeps you pure. It keeps you rooted, and it, sort of keeps you, ideologically distinct from, other things and other people. The other group, and the one that I tend to more and more associate with, are those that believe that culture isn't so much a barrier as it is a filter. Okay, and if you look at this diagram here, this little diagram that I did up many, many years ago in PowerPoint. Yes, the colors are coded in the sense that culture doesn't defend you so much as it tries to assimilate as it tries to relativize, as it tries to somehow serve as a way of, filtering, for lack of a better word, external stimuli, new ideas, new preferences, right? Culture will look at, outside influences, the world around us, and try to make sense of it. And that is why, if we just look at the color codes here, if external stimuli are represented by red, green, and yellow, and culture is represented by something blue, it's not that red and blue is going to make purple, or that yellow and blue is going to make green. It's going to kind of create this hybrid. It's going to create this alloy, right? New ideas, new ways of thinking, new experiences, right? They're all going to remain somehow yours. Well, they're going to remain new, but your identities are going to kind of, sort of adapt them for your own practices, your own beliefs, your own preferences in that sense, right? So culture in this sense is actually something that we can work with. A lot of times people say, culture gets in the way of progress. It gets in the way of new ideas. Culture gets in the way of people, thinking outside of their own parochial villages. And I don't think that that's the case at all. I think that that's a very elitist, and I think that's a very problematic statement to make. I think that what culture will do is that it will not only filter and blend new ideas with existing beliefs, but from a research standpoint, right? If you plan on going into the social sciences and want to do this, it tells people on the outside that if they ever hope to get a message across, to get some kind of new idea across to a specific community, they are going to have to tailor that delivery to make it understandable and to make it acceptable to said group, right? So, if you're, let's say you're a politician, and you're trying to, let's say explain how we need we need Green New Deal, right? We need, climate change policies. We need new environmental policies. And, look, if you're, young and poor and you haven't found your way in life yet, yeah, sure, this is going to be great. I don't care, recycle and, give a hoot, don't pollute. But if you are trying to convince people in an otherwise, let's say, coal mining town, or a town where much of the industry depends on mining or fossil fuel extraction or coal refinery, right? The first thing they're going to think of is that, you're going to shut down my coal factory, so that means that I'm out of a job, right? One way of doing this, if you believe that culture is a barrier, an obstacle, is either, tough love, we're just going to shut it down and, find something else to, make a living. And that really hasn't worked in the past, right? Another way of looking at this is saying either one of two things. Well, we're not going to shut down your coal mine immediately, but please understand that within the next, let's say, 3 years, we will. So in that time, we will be working to transition you from one line of work to another. And we will, who are the coal miners within this town? Here, it's whatever, you just visualize them raising their hand. We will train you to effectively be producers and installers of, wind turbines or solar energy panels. And we will... we recognize that your town is going to suffer economically by shutting down this one industry. So we're going to replace it with another industry. So you will still be working, and you will now be at the forefront of clean energy. And in a way, this understands one very important thing. Jobs are important to coal miners, but are they that wedded to mining coal? Or are they more concerned about keeping a job and earning enough money to provide for their families? And if it's the latter, well, then you can now work with them, right? So in this sense, culture functions as a filter rather than a barrier. And this is something that opens up the door to so many new studies and new conceptions in the study of culture and political culture than otherwise, right? If we regard culture as just something as a brick wall, there's not much that we can do with many parts of the world. And that, ta-da, is where political symbolism comes in. This was sort of like my long-winded introduction to the discipline and why political symbolism is probably one of the better approaches to understanding culture, right? Even better, in my opinion, than social capital. And there's a number of reasons for this, right? Political symbolism has a number of theoretical and methodological advantages. First, political symbolism offers a far greater understanding of the dynamics of culture, particularly during crises of authority. Now, I put crises of authority in quotes because this is taken from the early 20th century Italian anarchist Antonio Gramsci. All right, I like Gramsci. I kind of have a thing for him. You don't have to worry about who he is. But when Gramsci talks about a crisis of authority, he theorizes that the otherwise taken for grantedness of life, of laws, of regulations, of culture, whatever, are now suddenly in question, right? The stuff that we just assumed is just natural is no longer a case, right? And that can happen because of, wars or famines, major, political upheaval, some, external, event that creates a deus ex machina. The politics as usual, the way that we do things is just no longer, considered anymore, right? A good example of a personal crisis of authority is, you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and your house is on fire, okay? And you have 10 minutes. You have 10 minutes to get out, and you can in those 10 minutes, take what is vitally necessary from your house, right? So you have to decide, right, in 10 minutes, what do you bring with you? What is worth keeping, and what do you have to begrudgingly, leave for the flames, right? What do you take? Now, obviously, people are going to, wallet, keys, phone, laptop, that kind of stuff, right? But do you have certain mementos? Do you have certain possessions that, otherwise to anyone else are, normal possessions, no one really cares. But to you, they mean something. They're important. Right? Photo albums, certain letters, heirlooms, whatever it happens to be, right? At that moment, political symbolism shows us what you think is important, what defines you, what is worth preserving. Remember, one of the first things that we talked about in this class is that culture helps us identify what is important and what is worth defending, what is worth fighting for. Well, the fire in your house and the 10 minutes that you have to get out will help you determine very, very quickly what is worth fighting for, what is worth defending. And this allows us to see the convergence of those two faces of culture far better than more conventional theories. So like I said, David Layton is going to be coming back to hang out with us over the next couple of weeks. So in case you thought culture as system, culture as practice, why I only talked about it in the beginning, no. Culture, system and practice are going to be a big thing over the next couple of weeks. And so if you remember us talking about how we need both to understand how culture works, political symbolism is a great mechanism for allowing that to happen. And that is because political symbolism considers human agency and historical subjectivity far more than theories of social capital or social character. I realize that you're looking at what is social character. I took out the section on social character for the purposes of expanding our study on social capital. You don't have to worry about that. That's a series of notes for a standalone class. If you want to know what it is and you're really curious, we can, talk on the side. But I'm pretty certain you've got enough stuff on your plate. And finally, one other big thing that I like about political symbolism is that it is interdisciplinary. It is multidisciplinary. We talk about it. We talk about political symbolism within political science. However, much of its writings and theories are rooted in, as I've already mentioned, sociology and anthropology. And not only that, history. History is absolutely important to know. Remember, I've been saying this. You're going to do good political science, you've got to do history. If you come to me and say, hey, I want to do poli-sci and I don't know anything about history, I'm going to throw you into the statistics department because that's about as useful as you'll get. So other disciplines make our understanding of culture much more robust than more structurally institutional-oriented studies of political culture. So what exactly, therefore, is political symbolism? Okay? In so many words, okay, and we will start developing this definition as we progress in this section. In the simplest way, political symbolism studies the meanings and interpretations invoked from symbols, objects, and phrases. So right there is not just anthropology and sociology, but also psychology as well. The meanings and the interpretations invoked from symbols, objects, and phrases. Okay? The meanings, what understanding, when you look at a symbol, right, a national symbol, the American flag, the Statue of Liberty, the White House, the Lincoln Memorial, Mount Rushmore, what meanings do you get out of it? Do you get feelings of patriotism? Do you get feelings of, let's say, historical grievance? Particularly if we look at, let's say, Mount Rushmore, for instance, right? Some people will look at Mount Rushmore and say, 4 great American presidents. It's a national landmark. Others will look at Mount Rushmore and say, hey, that was actually taken from the Sioux tribe against their will. It was considered to be a sacred mountain, and we carved 4 white men into its wall, right? So what are the meanings that come out of symbols? These meanings are the ones that are connected to human activity and response. And it helps us understand, right, what is important to an individual or a group. So a symbol, is, as I just mentioned, something that we can look at that is tangible, right? A tangible symbol. The Manhattan Bridge, the World Trade Center, the Brooklyn Bridge, whatever it is that you want. And what are the meanings that come out of them? On a more personal thing, the symbols of memory triggers, right? On a more personal thing, I'm pretty certain that you all have, let's say, there's a song, right? There's a song that you have on your playlist, okay? And it might not be the greatest song that has ever been written. And in some cases, the song could be kind of cheesy, kind of silly, maybe even a guilty pleasure, right? Some of you might even realize there's this song that you love. You absolutely love this song. It is a guilty pleasure. You don't want people to see you dancing like an idiot to it, but you love this song. Want to know why? Because the song is more than just a song. It invokes a certain memory of when you listen to that song, right? There are songs that you listen to that kind of take you back to high school or middle school or elementary school, right? And in this case, the song is a symbol. It's not, the song could be something completely stupid, right? But it makes you think about a time in your life, and you get a little nostalgic. Even for, look, I know some of you, you're not even of drinking age yet, right? But you probably now in college have already developed some fond, nostalgic memories of high school, right? At the time, you didn't think that they were nostalgic, but now that you are removed from that period, you're getting nostalgic for it. And when you graduate LIU, you will probably develop some nostalgic memories of the time that you were in college. And you will associate certain things. It doesn't have to be songs. It could be food. It could be a book. It could be a paper, right? You could look at a paper on your hard drive or you print it out. And it doesn't have to make you feel good. It can make you feel horrible, right? The paper is a paper. It's a college paper, but it could be associated with a horrible class, right? An idiot professor. It could be one of the best classes that you ever took. But all of a sudden, right, it's more than just a college paper. It's more than just a song. It's more than just a slice of cheesecake. It's more than just a Metro card, right? It starts to include meanings, identities, and values that you put in based on your experiences, based on your cultural proclivities, based on your emotions in this sense, right? So, we're not just looking at, the Statue of Liberty is just some, green statue of some woman standing in the, New York, New Jersey harbor. But, if, let's say, you can trace your family history back to the point when your grandparents or great-grandparents, came, quote unquote, on the boat and, came through Ellis Island, it has a certain value to you as part of your family history. So by now, I think you're already able to understand that political and cultural symbolism is rather versatile, which certainly complicates it complicates what we're going to study. But at the same time, it makes what we're going to study a lot more interesting, right? Because it demonstrates the multiple meanings, interpretations, and behaviors derived from a physical object, right? So let's go back to that, that song, right, that you all have on your playlist. For you, that song is incredibly important. You'll never take it off. Sometimes you can't really listen to it because you get a little emotional. Now, if I listen to that song and I have no idea what it's connected to, for me, it's just another, song. It could sound stupid. It could sound okay. I don't get the same rush. Do I have that version on my playlist? Sure. But if I have you all listen to it and say, guys, girls, let me play something for you that takes me back to my days of innocence in the third grade, whatever. And whatever it is, third grade. I don't know even what was playing around in the third grade. I probably have it somewhere, right? And you're like, okay, Rossi, that's fine. My parents listened to that. Wow, you're old, So in a way, we find that culture and cultural connections are very, very tangible, depending upon the recipient. This also explains how culture is a far more dynamic variable than the more prevailing static assumptions. Okay? We tend to think culture is culture. That's it. Nothing changes. Well, nothing could be further from the truth, because values change by the senders, right? If you want to get all political here, right? If people in power are using symbols to appropriate certain messages, certain narratives, obviously they have some ability at changing, shaping, directing the value. And then the stuff that we've been talking about more frequently in this lecture is the changing meaning by receivers. Changing meaning by receivers. Your experiences at LIU are going to be different from mine, right? I have a longer, let's say, connection to the area, to the neighborhood. I'm also older than you, so I see the region. I see Flatbush Ave. I see Juniors. I see, DeKalb Ave or whatever it is, right? In a different set of values and memories than you do. If you're coming from out of town and this is your first time living in New York, then New York is New York, right? For me, can I tell the difference between the symbolic values of Brooklyn and Queens? Not only can I do that, I can break it down to neighborhood, right? I can break it down to neighborhood. So again, the way in which we perceive things is very different, incredibly unique by person to person. And this enables us to understand how culture is shaped and how culture can be reshaped as well. Right? So it gives us a lot more ability to look at culture not so much as that obstacle or barrier, and more so as a filter. So culture within studies of political symbolism is an unbelievably dynamic variable, right? I've been talking already that culture is no longer monolithic and unchanging, but, culture is something that I have frequently likened over the years to an all-you-can-eat Chinese buffet, right? You take what you want and you leave the rest. So, for instance, I decide that one day we're all going to go out to one of those high-end all-you-can-eat Chinese buffets. And I don't know if there's any in the Brooklyn area. I know we got a lot of them in Jersey. Or better yet, we'll just take the 7 all the way up to all the way up to Astoria, and we'll go out to Roosevelt Ave, and we'll go crazy. Okay, and we enter this Chinese buffet, this row upon row of God knows how much food is out there, and I say to everybody, okay, everyone, grab a plate. Dinner is on, President Klein. Have at it. Okay? And you all go out. And I say, and I come back with whatever's on your plate. Now, some of you in the room might be vegetarian, so you're going to skip the meat. Others are nothing but carnivores, and you believe that vegetables should be nothing other than a side dish. So you're going to go for the chicken and broccoli. You're going to go for the barbecue spare ribs. You're going to go for the pork dumplings. Okay? Some of you don't eat pork. Some of you keep kosher. Some of you eat halal. The point that I'm trying to make here is that what you take on your plate is largely what you want to eat, what you identify with. Now, there might be something. Now, we go up to Roosevelt Ave, Chinatown. I guarantee there's going to be some stuff you're not going to know what the hell it is, because this is actually Chinese food, right? This isn't one of those takeout places, okay? And you're going to be like, well, I don't know what it is. It could be mystery meat. You know what? I'm not going to touch it. You know what? That's fine. You choose not to eat it. You don't know what it is. You don't know how it's going to taste. It could be unbelievably salty. It doesn't matter. You come back with your plate, and I examine what is on your plate. What you choose is your cultural preferences, your cultural affinities, right? And in this case, what you don't choose is something that is not important to you, okay? So you take what you want and you leave the rest. Now, this by itself is just, random, haphazard culture. What if I were to then make this into an assignment, and I was to grade you? This was in lieu of a reading evaluation. Okay, I was to grade you on what you take on your plate, and what is my criteria? My criteria is what I would take on my plate. All right, let's just be real selfish right now. So you have to figure out what I like. And if you match my own selections, then the closer you will to get an A. And if you decide to go completely 180 different, okay, you run the risk of getting a low grade. Okay? Now, this is where hegemony comes in, because while the buffet allegory tells you that there could be many cultures to a society, when we bring political into political symbolism or political culture, then it becomes clear that there is maybe one or two or at most three variations that tend to be more preferred, that tend to be more legally, legally recognized, right? Now, this does not mean that all other cultures are abandoned. It just simply means that people, if they know what's good for them, if they know what they need to do in order to get through that society, they will start making decisions that might otherwise go against their personal preferences, but instead opt for certain variations that are favored by the authorities. Okay? So in this case, political symbolism, it's not a free-for-all. Okay? There are, of course, certain ways of thinking, certain ways of doing things. And you, as a rational thinking individual, sometimes have to make certain choices in order to be accepted by society or to reap benefits as opposed to costs. Now, the other thing that we need to understand about all of this, right, is that this is a perfect example of the two faces of culture, right? Remember that, from a political science standpoint, we begin with Abner Cohen, culture as practice, really the second face of culture, right? Myths and symbols are imbued with meaning and interpretation of our own choosing. So in this case, I decide what is important to put on your plate. And you kind of figure this out, and you decide you're going to pick and choose from a whole variety of things to match what I feel is the optimal plate of Chinese food. Here's where Clifford Geertz comes lurking around the corner with that first face of culture. What symbols we use and how we choose to interpret them have to come from somewhere. We simply can't make stuff up. So you are choosing based on two criteria. The first is the political criteria. If you know what will get you the A, you may decide to change your choosing and your preferences to conform to the legal norms of the assignment. The second and more abstract constraint is that no matter what you choose from, and this is the the big metaphysical thing about an all-you-can-eat Chinese buffet, you have to choose whatever is there. So if you're like, you know what, I really like Mongolian beef. I love me Mongolian beef. If the Chinese buffet does not have Mongolian beef that day, guess what? You're not getting Mongolian beef. So even within this idea of choice, personal choice, let's just take the whole Rossi tells you what to eat out. You just take whatever you want, whether it's Chinese buffet, Golden Corral, whatever. Don't go to Golden Corral, You are beholden to choose from what is provided. If it's already there, well, then you can choose it. If it's not there, you can't. What does this all mean? What it means is that political symbolism does give us an understanding of the dynamics of culture. There is no question about that. But cultural dynamism is still limited by what is available. It is still limited by larger macro-social preferences. So if we were to put this into more of a political framework, right? You could run for office, and you could, run for office on a campaign of whatever it is that you wanted. But if you're hoping to get elected, you have to somehow conform your beliefs and your objectives into things that your audience will recognize, that your audience will understand. So in other words, culture is not and never was a case of anything goes. Okay? You cannot make things up. Well, you can, but you do so at your own risk, right? You make things up at your own risk. You work within viable choices. Well, the sky is really the limit, okay? This is what I meant earlier by saying political symbolism brings in agency and history, human agency and historical subjectivity, okay? Now, where does this fit in? One very important aspect that we've been talking about, but I haven't formally identified it yet, is that meanings, interpretations, values, beliefs, they're all based on an incredibly important aspect of culture, and that is the notion of the past. Because within culture, largely what we believe, what we do, what we uphold, what we, whatever, okay, is not only rooted in the past, but has been structured in past practices. The past, history, the past. This stuff is unbelievably important because that's where culture lives. Culture lives in the past. And we constantly are drawn to the past for explaining things in the present and for seeking legitimacy in what we do in the present for future actions. Okay? So let me repeat that again. We are drawn to the past for explaining the present, for explaining and justifying the things that we do, and for seeking legitimacy not only in our present actions, but what we also will choose for future actions as well. Okay? Now that means that the past matters. History matters. Traditions matter, right? That's the Geertzian glue that kind of roots us to one place, and it allows us, we're kind of rooted to the ground, but we're able to use our hands to pick and choose whatever is around us, and we can get really flexible and stretch. We can grab a whole bunch of stuff, but there are certain things, right, that we have to kind of adhere to. So in this case, the past remains the past, but we reinterpret the past to fit with our actions of the day. So it's not like we're prisoners of the past, but we will interpret non-negotiable truths, non-negotiable elements of the past to help us make decisions, to help us decide what we put on our plate, right, that very day. Let's say one of you already went to that buffet, and you know better than to touch the, I don't know, the egg rolls. Right? Last time you touched the egg rolls, you got food poisoning. Oh, crap, the egg rolls are still there. All right, well, the past tells me avoid the egg rolls. So you go and do something else here. This provides, as I've been saying, a greater explanation for, at least from a political standpoint, why authoritarianism or democracy attains popular salience and political legitimacy in states. From a political science standpoint, we ask ourselves, why are some countries democratic? Why are some countries authoritarian? Why do some authoritarian countries remain authoritarian? And why do some democratic countries just constantly remain squeaky clean? Is it something about the culture? Yes and no. It is very much rooted within a cultural framework of argument. But to suggest that there is a group of people, and better yet, a culture for people that is inherently authoritarian is very, very problematic. A lot of people say, why are so many authoritarian states in the Middle East exist? Is it because Islam or Muslims or Arabs are authoritarian, right? That's very problematic to say. Or why is it that Vladimir Putin has kind of remained the czar of Russia for, the last 20 or so years? Are Russians inherently authoritarian? Not really, right? I mean, I know enough Russians to know that these people are the first to buck authority, okay? So why are states the way that they are? Political symbolism may help explain that. But we have to really delve deep into why the decisions are made and why certain narratives, why certain meanings are so collectively accepted by the citizenry. Okay? So this does, as I've mentioned, connect us to a number of other disciplines, right? First and most importantly, history matters. And I will go to my grave saying that. Again, you're going to do political science, you're going to have to hang out in the history department as well. Right? There's no other way around it. You're going to have to know history. History does matter. But, history, and I put this in quotes this time, history is often interpreted, reinterpreted, and sometimes even deliberately misinterpreted for contemporary needs and circumstances. You want to ask me, what is the most dangerous subject to teach in college? What's the most volatile, unstable subject to teach in college? Don't tell me chemistry, don't tell me physics, don't tell me plasma physics. The most dangerous subject to teach in college was, is, and always will be history. Because individuals who are given a history lesson in something, anything, for the first time, oftentimes are dependent on the narrative and the story that is presented to them. A lot of us just kind of take elements of American history for granted to such a degree that when those narratives are challenged, even if those challenging narratives are far more factually true than what we have been led to believe, people will defend the original narrative as in a way of thinking that they are defending the traditions and values of the country itself. So history is a lot more than facts and figures and just memorizing stuff. And I really, really, really wish that students who took social studies classes in middle school and high school, oftentimes had more dynamic history teachers, because just reading a textbook and memorizing dates and subjects can be unbelievably boring. But maybe that was the reason. The Board of Ed doesn't want you to start thinking critically about certain elements. To history, we add anthropology. Anthropology helps us understand preference formation, which is not surprising considering David Layton. We all went through him in the beginning of this semester. He's an anthropologist. We do sociology. We need a little bit of sociology for how beliefs are constructed and adhered to. And so by adding history, anthropology, and sociology, and if you want to jazz it up, throw in a little psychology just to spice things up a little bit, we add meaning, mechanism, and policy to our studies. And so, again, I don't want to, go off on another tangent here, folks, but, I'm kind of getting whimsical. And it's not only that, it's, the coffee that I'm drinking right now is, making me creative in thinking. But political science by itself can be a rather boring subject. Political science actually necessitates add-ons. You need to be a good economist to do political science. You need to be a good historian to do political science. You could actually, link up health studies with political science, and suddenly you have a purpose in figuring out why healthcare and why human rights issues are so problematic in some areas, as opposed to others. So political symbolism is, I think, a very emblematic representation of political science in that it needs other disciplines in order to work. Okay, and in this situation, I've been saying before that political symbolism has really a number of merits. Right? A number of merits that are worth pointing out. First of which is that it offers a study of cultural congruency. Cultural congruency between democracy and culture amid formlessness. Right? So within Petro's chapter, which is very important to read, and I want you to, read it at least 2-3 times. And I'm hoping that this lecture will flesh out a lot of the important stuff. But look specifically at pages 102 to 105, when Petro talks about this formlessness. This is what I talked about earlier in the lecture, a crisis of authority. When the taken for grantedness of life is no longer guaranteed, and suddenly we are back to not really a case of anything goes in culture, but unconventional approaches to politics, unconventional approaches to solving economic, social, political, cultural issues become considered. Well, this is where political symbolism becomes all the more important. And considering that we have been living, ladies and gentlemen, in a period of formlessness, arguably from 2008, with the beginning of the economic crisis, to, for sure, since 2016. Not with the election of Donald Trump, but with the defeat of Hillary Clinton. The defeat of Hillary Clinton was the biggest blow to the status quo, the biggest blow to the taken for grantedness. And Trump has just been, for lack of better thing, just having his own way in running the country, and there are a growing number of people that think that this is the way that we should go. And the upcoming election, I'm sorry to say, isn't going to be the most, exciting, because the alternative is a resumption, a return to the status quo that gave us Trump. At least during the primaries, right? We had, some dynamic engagement with, ideas of democratic socialism, not just with Bernie Sanders, but, with a new generation of politicians and political elites that really energize and galvanize and mobilize people under the age of 40. So the United States is for sure living in a period of formlessness right now, and it will not go away after Election Day. Political symbolism also has merits in demonstrating that the new has deep roots in the past. So whenever there is some, new idea, new way of doing things, let's just stick with Donald Trump, for instance, right? Trump wants to make America great again, right? That was his, big slogan here. And there's a number of things that we can draw from that slogan, which I will admit is unbelievably powerful. First of all, the idea that make America great again. What's the most important word there? Again. So it implies that America at one point was great. We don't specifically mention when it was, but we are led to believe that it is not great now, right? Back in 2016. But we want to make America great again. And if you follow the Trump logic, what defines great? Conservatives in the United States usually look to 2 decades. The 1980s under Ronald Reagan, and the 1950s. Not so much under Eisenhower, but just the general nostalgia of the 1950s, right? When things were just, great. And we don't really go beyond that. But, it is certainly better than the hippy-dippy period of the 60s. the liberal chaos of the 90s. This is their own narrative. And then the less said about Barack Obama, the better. Okay. So when we talk about political symbolism, showing how the new has deep roots in the past, we are talking about really a usable past for public consumption today. We are using memories, nostalgias, narratives from the past, a past that you may not even remember living in, but you're led to believe was great, and we are going to bring that into the present. So even if you didn't live in the 50s, we're going to bring the feel-good period of the 50s back for you today. Even if you were too young or were born after the 1980s, we're going to bring the period of American greatness of the 80s into where we are today. Okay? And, if you are, if you're a conservative, you're going to look at certain periods of the past and you're going to downplay others. And we're going to get to this, in due time here. But the idea is that there are certain things that work, there's certain things that you want to work, and then there's other things that we're going to forget. We're going to ignore, we're going to bury as much as possible. But what this demonstrates is that any political system can harness public support and affirmation for its policies, interests, and strategies, democratic or otherwise. It gives us an idea that democracies, authoritarian states, hybrid regimes, whatever it is out there, right? They're in power not because of raw coercion and authority. They're in power to no small extent because they have convinced a segment of the population that they deserve to be in power and that they are the legitimate representatives of that country's culture. Right? This can work in Western countries, non-Western countries, what have you. And, if I sound like I'm confusing you right now, what I'm trying to basically say in so many words is that political symbolism is a great way of having us understand why certain countries are the way that they are. It doesn't justify it. It just helps explain it. And by explaining it, it gives us a better insight into understanding why it is, and if we're looking to change the country, if we're looking to change the culture, we know what we're working with. We know what's important to that group, rather than just simply coming in like some State Department CIA official and saying, here's a carbon copy of the U.S. Constitution, work with it, see what happens, okay? So how are symbols constructed for political culture? Right? We construct symbols out of a number of elements: history, myths, symbols itself, narratives, socio-political discourse. I'm going to get to all of them, right now. All right. First, I want to, and this is, I tell you what, if you're listening and you're kind of in and out right now, maybe what you should do, and I'm sort of telling the student that's kind of in and out right now to kind of either perk up, get some coffee, maybe pause the video, go out, get yourself a stretch, because this stuff that I'm about to say is now really important. And I would say this even if I were teaching in a class itself. This is usually where I'm like, okay, everybody, start paying attention, because this stuff, you got to know this stuff in order for the next couple of weeks to really work. Now, I'm going to timestamp this definitely on the video. But if you're listening in right now and you're like, okay, Rossi, I got it. All right, so pen, paper, let's go. All right, so here we go. This stuff is important. The difference between history and myth. Okay? Oftentimes, we understand history to simply be a collection of facts and figures, right? Just simply a chronological account of the past, right? And, if you're, one of those students like, oh, for God's sake, Rossi, I just want to take this class to graduate so I can become a pharmacist or a nursing, aide or whatever it is, right? Stop bothering me with this, right? Well, indulge me for just a couple of weeks here. Oftentimes, what we learn as history is more often than not chosen to be recorded, remembered, and commemorated. right? History, for the vast majority of individuals, already has a certain degree of myth to it. Now, what's the difference between history and myth? Myth, not, mythology, but myth is an element of history that has been given organic life by public acceptance over an extended period of time. In other words, myth is not the actual, factual, objective, empirical, historical account of something, but it is a group's general understanding and interpretation of something. So the history of the American War of Independence is very different from the myths that we all carry about the American War of Independence. Most people, when they think of the War of Independence, right, we all rise up against the British. We want to be free. We want liberty and justice for all, right? Yay. The actual history of the War of Independence identifies a very small percentage of American colonists that openly and actively worked against the British. There were far more loyalists and non-committal fence-sitters than there were these big liberty freedom fighters that we like to think of today. And so the history of the American colonies during the War of Independence is that more often than not, the population were either sitting this out or telling the British where the insurgents were hiding. The myth is that everybody rose up, everybody followed George Washington, and the British were inhumanly evil. Now, what is correct? This is where things get interesting. Because if you say the history, the factual stuff is correct, you're going to have a hard time trying to convince many, many ordinary Americans that what they believe is wrong. The myth can oftentimes, right, be as non-negotiable as it is highly interpretive. In other words, the myth is taken to be the truth. The myth is taken to be factual history. So whenever you have somebody trying to haughtily tell you, if you knew your country's history, or if you read up on history, or learn history in the comment sections, I guarantee you folks, 90% of the time, you're being told what to do by somebody who doesn't know history, but is engaged in a certain myth, and takes that myth to be for granted, takes that myth to be factual. Okay? Now, this is also where we can bring in, that ever so famous study of path dependency. You thought that we were going to get rid of path dependency? Oh, no. Path dependency is unfortunately going to be haunting us until your final exam. But I feel the need to look at it in sort of a different light right now than institutional performance and whether or not a country had a renaissance. But path-dependent legacies, which we have been talking about, right, need to be differentiated between institutional legacies and cultural legacies. And more often than not, the two are conflated and used together. This was Robert Putnam's big problem, right? Robert Putnam's big problem is that he just sort of looked at the lack of institutional legacies in the South, kind of created the cultural problems. Whereas Sabetti was like, no, you got to break the two of these things up. One is received from the past. Institutional legacies are received from the past. Okay? Environmental degradation, war, famine, some act of God. Right? This is an institutional legacy. A hurricane, a flood, a stock market crash. These are things that anyone coming into power has to deal with. 9/11, this is an institutional legacy. Okay? There's no way to avoid that stuff. Cultural legacies, on the other hand, and if you have been listening to this, and I know that this is long-winded, but I'm trying to explain this to you from an anthropological point of view here. Cultural legacies are transmitted. Cultural legacies are transmitted by socio-political elites. Go back to the Chinese buffet again. Go back to the plate that I kind of pressured you all into designing. Someone that does not know the difference between institutional and cultural are going to look at all of you and they're going to say every single one of you has the same culinary preference. That must mean that people who go to Long Island University must have that culinary preference. And that's wrong. The cultural legacy in this case is that I, as the elite, have transmitted to you what I choose to be a way of thinking, the way I choose to be what we're going to eat that day. And so without knowing that, the outside observer is simply going to be drawing, through conceptual stretching, faulty conclusions. So what that means, though, is that in the absence of this cultural legacy, there are multiple legacies for a group, right? If left to your own devices, you're all going to fill up your plate with your own preference, your own choice of food. But why does one take more importance than the other? Because of people in power. People in power, socio-political elites, use their leverage to exude their choices and their preferences to advance one particular issue, one particular way of thinking in the present. So in this case, it might actually be better to refer to these path-dependent legacies as narratives instead of legacies. It's not really legacies. It's just people being smart enough to respond to what they're being told and, how to act. So perhaps that, Southern Italy needs to be understood more through its cultural narratives than through its cultural legacies. Okay, well, what exactly is that? Once again, perk up, pay attention. This stuff is critically important because I need to now introduce to you full definitions of what symbols and narratives are in order to understand how this stuff works. A narrative, and I've been talking about the word narrative repeatedly in this lecture. A narrative is a conscious connection of previously unstructured and possibly even unrelated events, figures, and ideas into a seemingly imploded framework of logic and reference. This is my definition, okay? This is my definition of what a narrative is. A narrative is a conscious connection of previously unstructured and possibly even unrelated events, figures, and ideas into a seemingly imploded framework of logic and reference. In so many words, it's the story. Now, what do we get out of this? A narrative is something that is constructed from various bits and pieces of pre-existing symbols, earlier narratives, other elements, what's all put together, right? But the narrative is us stitching these things together and making it into a cohesive and convincing story, right? That's what narratives are. Historical narratives, cultural narratives, political narratives, whatever it is that you want to call it, right? Now, by itself, you might be able to conceptualize this in your head, but there's a far better way of encapsulating narratives for the layman, and that is through symbols. Symbols function as the tools of narrative, both tangible, as in the form of monuments, commemorations, and rituals, and intangible, such as feelings of belonging, patriotism, and tradition, right? So if the narrative is the story, the symbols function as the characters, the props, the special effects, and the direction, right? The two of them go together to create the movie. So a tangible symbol, right? I don't know, a monument, a landmark, a cultural landmark, a statue, the name that we choose to give a street or a park or a square, for that matter, is a way of using that symbol to create a narrative about what is important to us, who we want to remember, and how we want to remember that person. But symbols can also be intangible, because I can't forget, our friends in sociology and psychology. That song on your playlist is a symbol. But instead of someone documenting what you are supposed to feel with that song, it's a gut feeling for yourself, right? It's a gut feeling. Or a smell, or a type of food, right? There's certain foods that you eat that will evoke memories. The food is the symbol, especially if the food is offered on a specific holiday that you celebrate. If you're Christian or Jewish or Hindu or Muslim, there's certain foods that you eat on certain holidays. And to make matters even better, if the food that you eat is connected to some family tradition, then in that case, you are connecting the food not just with the holiday, but with your own personal recollections. That is your narrative. The symbol evokes the narrative. And the narrative is how you respond, how you identify. It could be your personal culture. It could be your collective culture, right? Do you have a favorite sports team? I think we asked this beforehand, right? Whether it's baseball or football or soccer or basketball or hockey or, whatever it is, right? Here we are in New York, right? New York Yankees are, a big, big, big thing, okay? Just seeing the Yankee logo, seeing Yankee Stadium is going to, produce for one person a feeling of pride and team affinity. And then for everyone else, either indifference or outright hatred, especially if you're a Mets fan or a Red Sox fan, or if you're one of those old timers, a Dodgers fan, right? Before the Dodgers moved to L.A. So symbol and narrative. Once again, folks, get this stuff down. You understand how these things are defined. The next couple of weeks is going to be very, very easy to understand. Now, let's wrap this thing up because I know we got a lot of stuff that we cover a lot of stuff here. This is some heavy duty stuff. Let me finish out by asking one rather optimistic question. If I have described a number of narratives, then obviously there can be more than one narrative to a group. There can be more than one culture to a group. This is the entire point of political symbolism. Right? Political symbolism gives us the versatility in knowing that there are multiple cultures to a group. Some of those cultures might be more beneficial. Some might be detrimental. Some might be progressive. Some might be retrogressive. But they all exist there. They're all there in the Chinese buffet, right? So narratives, are used for a series of socio-political discourses, democratic or otherwise. So is there more than one narrative to what it means to be American? Dozens of narratives. Do we have progressive narratives? We do. Do we have narratives that we really, really, really hope remain buried? Absolutely. Do we have some narratives in the United States today that we kind of wish would go away? Yes, And do we have others that we wish if we gave them a little bit more help and support and votes, we could make that more popular? Absolutely as well, okay? Look, I'm going to give you, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Five narratives. 5 general narratives that describe the United States. Okay? The first one, and probably the one that everybody in power wants you to believe. America is the land of the free and the home of the brave. Right? We are the country that rises up against tyranny. We fight for freedom wherever there's trouble. Right? We are the good guys that come to everyone's rescue because we uphold the purest beliefs of freedom and liberty. And a lot of these statements are empty because they don't really mean anything, but it certainly evokes this idea that if we are the land of the free, we stand up against authoritarianism. We stand up against tyranny. We fight against oppression here and abroad. How about the narrative, the city on the hill? This was a reference taken from back in the Puritan period. So we're talking the 1600s. It was one of the sermons of, I think it was Jonathan Winthrop, some Puritan minister, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But the idea of the city on the hill, right? Boston. I think it was in Boston or whatever it was, right? The city on the hill, that we are our community, our new established community. We are the city on the hill with a light that shines out in the darkness as a beacon to all wayward vessels and people seeking a safe harbor and a new life, right? America draws people around the world to come here. We are the enlightened city on the hill. And when you think about it, there is no other symbol in this country that represents that city on the hill with the light that shines out than, you guessed it, the Statue of Liberty. And it is not a surprise that the majority of immigrants coming to the United States sailed into New York Harbor, saw the Statue of Liberty on one side, Ellis Island on the other. Okay? My father came here in 1950, one of the last groups of people to actually come, yes, on a boat. He did the whole boat Ellis Island thing, 1950. Okay? He still remembers that, right? Still alive today, right? Still remembers that. He remembers seeing that for the first time. He heard about it. And the fact that, you hear these stories when immigrants finally see the Statue of Liberty, they cry, they cheer. Why? Because it's something that they heard about and it finally is there for them to see. That's a narrative that, is very, very, very hard to dispel. The world comes to America. When was the last time people were like, hey, you know what? I want a better life. So, honey, pack up the kids. We're moving to Russia. No one ever goes to Russia, or we're going to Honduras, or we're going to, Pakistan. No, right? You leave those countries and you come here. Now, those are the two feel-good narratives. Another element about the United States, and some of them are not the most flattering, we are the society of spectacle, right? We don't really have a deep-seated culture, Greeks have their temples and their churches. The Italians have their, Roman art and their operas. The French have their, their baguettes and their wine, whatever, I don't know. What does America have? America doesn't really have a culture like that. We don't have operas. We have rock and roll albums. We don't have haute cuisine. We have burgers, hot dogs, and Coca-Cola and beer, right? Our holidays are punctuated by barbecue and beer. Our culture is McDonald's and Nike, well, sneakers basically, right? And toys and Saturday morning breakfast cereals. Our culture is not as developed as other countries, but guess what? Everyone wants our culture. Everyone wants our food. They want our clothes. They want our movies. They want our music. And in that case, what are we? We're a marketing firm. So America's best image, America's best narrative is, yeah, we don't have a deep-seated culture like you people do, but we produce the stuff that everybody wants, And you know what? I'm totally, totally fine with that. How about a fourth narrative? America as the world's policeman. Now, this can go either way. On one way, if you're totally pro-imperialism, you could say, yeah, that's right. We are the United States. We can divide the world into two groups. The countries whose ass we saved and the countries whose ass we kicked. All right? That's us. We come in, we save the day. We win wars when we don't start wars, but we end them. America, right? But at the same time, you could be at the receiving end, or you could be the critical aspect of saying, yeah, America is the world's policeman, which in many cases we overextend our military, we waste money on weapons of mass destruction, and we end up being seen as the modern day global empire, right? We don't take over imperial-wise or colonial-wise like the British or the French or the Dutch or the Belgians or the Romans or the Ottomans did. But, we basically just try to, we're the world's policemen, so we just kind of like snuff out any other form of, independence, any other form of self-identification. And then finally, America, the empire in decline. Again, two ways you can look at this. On one level, we are a declining power. There's no other way for me to describe it to you in 2020. It doesn't mean that we are going to become irrelevant, but we no longer have the dominant hegemonic spot that we once did, 25, 30, 40, however many years ago. Now, you could look at that and say, well, one way that we are the empire in decline is because we are the world's policeman. Maybe if we stopped being the world's policeman, we'd be, somehow be able to recoup our losses. And then on the other end, you've got those diehard American patriots that are just like, yeah, and we have to do everything possible to halt that. If we are in decline, the world will fall into chaos. And I am not going to be alive when I see these, liberals, whatever, destroy our country's prestige. We need to be, if we can't be respected in the world, we're going to be feared in the world. And that is what we will do to prevent our empire from declining, right? So you kind of see how all of these narratives tell a different story of the same thing, right? And in this case, it opens up the door to a wide array of cultural interpretations of one group in one society. And it also helps us understand, right, how versatile culture can be in explaining, justifying, or at the absolute least just identifying why things are the way that they are. Now, I have taken up, I think, far too much of your time right now. I was hoping to go through some visuals. And I think what I'm going to do is, I'm going to take a break myself, because this has just been one sitting. I haven't even stopped and clipped this. This is just me drinking coffee with, well, there's some good stuff in here. I am going to either decide whether I want to put another video with nothing but visuals, just kind of look and see, or hold off on that until we have our class on Wednesday. But this is material that I want you to really, absorb. I understand. Petro's chapter is dense. All right, it is heavy academic stuff. And if I can kind of reveal a little bit of my cards right now, don't hate me for this, that's grad school material. Okay, so I understand I'm giving you some high-end stuff here, but I have a sense that you're going to be able to work with it, especially after we talk it through and after you listen through this lecture 1 or 2 times. I think you're going to really be able to understand this and work with it. I've done it with undergrads before, not honor students, and they seem to have walked away from this really, really excited and energized. So I think I've got some high hopes for you guys here as well. But let me stop now and let you absorb all of this. And if you see another lecture with just nothing but visuals, then I decided to do that one as well. And then we can really have a lot of stuff to talk about, on Wednesday. But suffice from there, right? I hope you enjoyed all of this. I hope that this was clear. And I also hope that you're excited to delve into this material for the second half of class. So I will see you very, very soon.